Welcome back at Kutia Dev Stage. We have another demonstration planned for you today, which is brought to you by ICT for Kosovo's growth. Mr. Uran Hajzeraj, who is the backend developer at Frakton, is going to show us how you can create a dynamic web page with PHP. Mr. Hajzeraj, the scene is yours, and best of luck.
Okay, thank you, and hello, and I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. And I hope that you are all doing well during these times. My name is Uran Hajzeraj, and I am the guy in this photo. I am known as the guy who drinks a lot of water in the office, and that's why I have this photo of me in our company's website. That is just me and holding a water tank. And I actually have a tip for all of you, and it's just to try and drink a lot of water. Besides the fact that it is healthy and is good for your health, it's especially beneficial for a certain job such as developers. Because we sit a lot during the day, it's really important that we stand up from time after time. And it also, if we're just having some issue with some code, it really gets us a different perspective if we just move away from the computer for a few minutes, and then we can come back with a fresh mind. I did mention the company, and I work as a backend developer at Frakton. I believe that some of you have already heard of Frakton probably. And we are a company that specializes in building information systems, such as web pages, web applications, mobile applications, and we also offer a lot of specialized cloud solutions that are mostly related to the internet and to the web in general. Just a heads up, this is my first time giving a presentation at a tech conference, so thank you to KosICT for inviting me and for allowing me to share my knowledge here with you today. So as you probably know from the title of the talk, I'm going to talk to you about PHP. For those of you who are not familiar, PHP is a programming language that is mostly used on the web, and it's actually really used a lot in the web. And just a survey that I could find in the internet, there are 79% of all websites in the internet for whom the programming language that is used is known. So 79% of those are built on PHP, and that's just a survey from W3Techs, which is a company that specializes in web surveys. Also, PHP does get some kind of a bad rap on the internet, and especially among developer circles, saying that it's not probably the best choice to use in 2020 and in the future. But I tend to heavily disagree on that, because I think it's a great language. It has been around since 1994, which makes it older than I am. And it's also really scalable, it's really stable, and also very performant. Just to show how these things are true, you can just look at the latest release of PHP, which is PHP 8, which is the latest major version that was released just 2 weeks ago. And it includes a lot of features that make it really a joy to work with, and it's also added some features and some optimizations that make it also really fast, because that's something that a lot of developers are concerned about, but that's no longer an issue with PHP. It does get probably this bad reputation that it gets. It's mostly related to the fact that in the early 2000s probably it was just mostly used as a procedural language, so it was just like this one big file that contained all the code. But now it's a fully object-oriented programming language that it's used to build a lot of great and very big applications on the internet. I talked about the community a bit and about the frameworks. So it's worth mentioning that there are a lot of great tooling out there and great frameworks that are used with PHP. And such tools are frameworks, for example. Just some of the most popular ones that are in use today include Laravel, Symfony, Laminas, which was previously known as Zen framework, which was really used heavily in the early 2000s, and it still is at some degree. It's worth mentioning that Laravel is a web framework that has most stars on GitHub, so it's probably one of the most popular ones, not just in PHP, but also in other programming languages as well. Symfony is also a great choice, boosting more than 15 years of being on the market, and it's really mature, and it allows developers to just use some of the components of it. You don't need to use the whole framework, and it's also what other frameworks use to build their own stuff as well. For example, Laravel uses heavily from Symfony, and it has some components that it utilizes as well. It's also worth mentioning this tool, which is Composer, and Composer basically is the de facto package manager that is used for PHP. What that means is that Composer is just a tool that allows us to pull in different dependencies or different code that somebody else wrote that we can use in our application, and it makes our development lifecycle much faster. And this is, for example, the tool that we would use to also install our framework for a specific project, and so on and so forth. Another tip that I have for you today is to use the tools. First and foremost, the reason why you should use such tools is because they are free. And I did put this exploding head icon here because it's mind-boggling how much tool and how much power is given to us for free. So we don't really have to pay anything for it. Not only are they free, but they're also open source, which means that they can be used, we can contribute to these tools as well. We can scan and see the entire source code, and we can understand how certain things work, and we can make our own updates and just try and get those together, or as we say, merged with the actual framework or the actual tooling. So that really gives the community a really nice advantage, if I can say so. Another reason why you should actually use these tools is because developing them yourself is very time consuming. So imagine if you're doing some client project or some client work, and you're going to tell your client that, hey, I'm going to take a full month just to set up a basic authentication system because I'm building everything from scratch. So that's not good news for anyone. So you try to avoid that as much as you can. So these tools really help you to get started really fast. Also, what is worth mentioning is that building everything from scratch on your own can pose a lot of security issues. So it's not advisable that you do that unless you're trying to test something or just to mock things out and just try some new stuff. But mostly you would like to stick to the tooling that is given for you. It's worth mentioning that a lot of frameworks such as Symfony or Laravel, that at least I know of, have had audits on their code base by companies that specialize on cybersecurity. So they really know their stuff, and they know what they are doing. So if they were to have some sort of security issue or some sort of bug, they would be immediately patched and fixed. And with tools like Composer that I mentioned earlier, it would be really easy to just update and fix those issues that we might have had. Besides the fact, I mostly talked about why we should use such tooling. Excuse me. We should also probably mention why is it important that such tools are used besides their benefits. So a lot of work that we do during our development lifecycle for a certain project on the web, it includes a lot of repetitiveness. There are a lot of things that are the same from application to application. So it's a really good idea to just have those things just built for us before and not really deal with them if we can avoid that. Such examples would include a request and a response lifecycle. For example, we have some sort of request from the browser and we need to understand that. The server needs to understand that request, it needs to parse it, it needs to do something with it, probably just introduce a side effect or something, and then it has to return a response for that. Another example of that is the authentication system that I mentioned. So a lot of applications out there have some sort of authentication system that you input your email and password and you are allowed to access the application further on. So also another problem would be authorization. For example, if you would have an admin user but also a regular user, they would have different privileges on what they can do on the system. Another thing that is worth mentioning is the validation. Imagine you have a form and there needs to be some sort of validation that the email field is actually an email and not just a random string of characters, because that would be bad news for everyone. And also the same applies, for example, to a phone number and so on and so forth. Another thing that is really important is that these tools help us with testing. Imagine if you have a very big and complex application and you have to have some sort of testing for that application. One way that you could do that is just open the browser manually and just go and test that the new feature that you added works as expected. But that's not really scalable, because imagine if you're building something on the scale of Twitter, for example, and you would have to test every little bit of functionality every time you change something. So that's not good. So basically what you can do is just have some more code on top of the code that you wrote before that would just test the actual code that everything is working correctly. So it gets a bit more technical, but we don't really have time for that. So I'm just going to show a demo application that I did build, and I did use Laravel because it's a really easy framework to use, and for the short amount of time that we have, it's probably the only framework that will allow us to do and build something that is actually meaningful. So I'm just going to open my terminal, and I already have a project set up, but if we were to create a new project, I already have Laravel installed on this computer. So if I just type Laravel, you can see that it actually shows us the installer. And if we were to create maybe just a new application, we could just type Laravel new and the name of the project, for example, awesome PHP, hit enter, and it would actually just start and create the framework. But I'm just going to cancel that because that would take a while, and just jump back to the project that I did set up before. So as you can see, I just gonna open my code editor that I have here and just show you the default structure of the project. Just close this out. Okay, so basically, as you can see on the left here, this is the default boilerplate code that Laravel comes out with. This is the latest version of Laravel, which is Laravel 8, and it just includes some more niceties added to the framework that makes the lives of Laravel developers, such as myself, a lot easier. Probably you're wondering what we can do with this, and so I'm just going to start a web server here and just going to try and test this application on the browser. So I can just type in this command here. You can also, this uses the PHP web server under the hood, but you can see that the server is now started, so we can test it out on the browser. So I'm just going to open the Chrome here, and I have that address set up here, so you can use both localhost and this IP here. They're basically the same. So you can see that I believe you can see the application here, or I don't think it's showing on the screen there. So if you see the application, it's just this boilerplate or just this default page that is shown with Laravel, and you can probably you're wondering how it comes from that code that we generate that is generated for us to this page here. So that basically just comes down to how Laravel works under the hood, or how every request for that matter works. So if you go to the public directory here, you would have this index.php file, which is basically the starting file for any Laravel application, and it just sets up the environment. It bootstraps the framework, which just basically means creating some classes, loading some configuration that there is, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of more things that happen under the hood, and some of those are quite complicated, but we can just go and talk maybe about some of the a few of the main points that we can see. If you were to look at this, so one important aspect of the framework is the routing system that it has, which basically just allows us to map from one specific route that we define in our application to a specific class that would handle that actual request. That's basically just a class called a controller, which allows us to do just that. And it will just include some code that for a given request, we would actually just do some stuff with that. So if we just look at the page that we have opened here, so we can see that this shows this nice page that Laravel comes out with. But if we were to just comment this page, for example, and just go back and refresh, we can see that we would see a 404 not found, because basically this is what the routing system does. It maps this address that we have to this specific view, in this case, that just contains some, I can just show that real quick. But it just includes some templating, which basically just shows this this view that we have here. If I just go and refresh it, we can see it again now. One other thing that you can see here is that this did not come out with the framework by itself, but you can see these login and register buttons that we have here. Basically, a great framework such as Laravel and all the other frameworks that I know of in PHP have this sort of authentication system built in, which that basically means that they can allow you to easily set up your project and continue working on that. Basically, what I did use for installing the authentication system is just a package that is maintained by Laravel, which is called Laravel Breeze, which came in the latest release of Laravel. And I did install such a tool such a package with Composer, that package manager that I talked before. And as you can see, this is the important section here that you can look at. We have this require and require dev, which basically lists all of our dependencies that we have in our code. Require are just the dependencies that are actually used in production, which is just a term of saying when our site is live or application is live and out, and everybody in the world can access it. And require dev just lists the development dependencies. It's really important that we have different type of environments at which we work, because it's not the same process when we are working locally and developing our application compared to the application that is put out to the world. And it's important that these requirements do not get downloaded or installed in our project in the live environment, because they would add to the size of the project, but they can also be a security issue. So I just thought it's important to mention that. But as you can see, I did install Laravel Breeze, which basically just scaffolds this authentication system for us. And if I go ahead and just test the login page, you can see that I see this beautifully designed login page. I also have some functionality about forget password, which would basically just send an email to the email that I input here, and I could reset the password, and I can go ahead and just register an account here. For example, I just can add my account here, Uran Frakton. And you can see that this email that I just inputted has already been taken. This is just another point of showing how Laravel and these frameworks protect us, because they validate the email and they make sure that no other email, such as this one that I inputted, so it would basically not allow duplicate emails to be inputted into the system, because that would be bad news, because there would be a lot of issues with that approach. So I can just add another email here, and I can just type in a password, and you would be able to see that I have successfully logged in, and you have this hello KosICT message that I put in. You can also test the forget password functionality, but since this is not my machine, I don't really have that set up, but it would basically just send out an email where I could just reset the password. It was just showing a form that would require me to input a new password, and that would basically work. It's worth mentioning that this user data is stored in a database, which is basically just a store for our data, as the name implies. And it allows us to store data that would later be used by the system. And one such example is just the user authentication system. So I can just go ahead and just log in with my account now. And this is basically just the boilerplate code that Laravel or typical Laravel applications come out with. Just some functionality that we can test. I did add a few routes and some things to the application, and I just made a very simple and dummy to-do list, which is basically what you want to try out when you're trying new things, because it really pinpoints a lot of functionalities that the application or a lot of systems that the application needs to communicate with, such as the database, which is a big one. So what I can do here, and I can just, hey, sure, just add a message here. I can just say, stay hydrated. I can just add another message. Don't listen to PHP memes. I can add another one. Breathe in, breathe out. And you can see that these would be added. And every time I refresh the page, I'm actually refreshing it, but since it's locally, it goes out, it refreshes very fast. But you can see that this data is fetched from the database, it's stranded by our application, and it's shown here. I can also just click and check these. I can go ahead and delete some of them, for example. And probably you're wondering how exactly this is working. So I just have some more routes set up here. So you can see, for example, these to-do routes here, and these are what are being used under the hood actually. So if I were to open this to-dos controller, okay, I can click through it. You can see that this is basically all the functionality that is needed to create such a to-do list, at least from the backend point of view. Basically, we have an index page or index action that allows us just to render those to-dos. It just shows a to-do view, which is basically another file that we have in our system that I did set up beforehand. And it basically just contains some more data with it. This to-do all is just the way of Laravel allowing us to fetch all the to-dos from the database. So we basically have another database, another table set up that is called to-dos, and just contains all of our data that we input there. And this would basically just allow us to fetch it from the database. We also have a store method that would basically just get the data that we inputted here at the add new to do. That would just save it to the database. And we simply redirect back, which just takes us back to this page once we are done with inputting our to do. We also have this functionality of check, which just allows us to trigger the state of finishing the task. So basically, it just allows us to toggle the state of finish of the state state. Okay, so basically, if we click on it, we can see that we can just toggle between the state. And also, we have this simple method called destroy, which basically just gets the to-do by the ID. It's just something that is just generated for us, so it's just a unique identifier for all of the to-dos, and we can simply delete and just return back, and once I do that, you can see that it's deleted and no longer is in our system. But if you see what is going on here, you can tell that this page, every time we're inputting something, is just refreshing the whole application. And that is not necessarily good. It doesn't really matter for our application because it's a really simple application. It doesn't contain a lot of complexity or no complexity at all. And it's being developed locally. So imagine if you have an application that is on the internet, or if you're using Twitter, for example, and you were trying to tweet out something, and every time you did tweet, the whole page would have to refresh. And that's not really a great user experience to be had in 2020, or at least in the past 10 years probably. So that's why we can do something else that would basically just allow us to get rid of this full page refresh lifecycle, which is somewhat annoying for the user. And it can have a lot of other performance benefits for our application. To do that, we can probably just use something like Ajax, or just a terminology for just sending requests asynchronously and just waiting for some response, and then just doing something in our application that would just change the state of it, change our HTML, and add some other item to the list. But that is a lot of tedious work. It's not really ideal, at least for someone like me who is a backend developer who doesn't really like to mingle a lot with front end. It would be a lot easier if I could do that all of that process in PHP. And actually there's a great way to do that, and it's just another package that we can install for Laravel, which is called Laravel Livewire. Basically what it allows us to do is just create a highly interactive application that would try to skip as much of the hard refreshes that are in our application, and just do everything asynchronously and do it in the back. So it would contain a lot of JavaScript, but we wouldn't actually have to write the JavaScript ourselves. So I did set up some more routes for that. So all that I had to do in the routing system, if you can see, is just add this route livewire to-dos, and basically it just points to another class, which is just the livewire component basically. And it just contains some logic here, which is pretty much the same as it were for the controller that we did set up before, but we don't really have to do anything that is a lot different from our typical workflow. So I did set up another route here, as I mentioned, and it pretty much looks the same. For example, we have these two items added that I did add before, but I can get rid of them now. And you can see that happens instantly, or at least it looks instantly. It doesn't really have to refresh the page, and it just sends out a request to the server, and that is all that has to be done in a way to make this function. One really important note that I'm going to make here is that I did not write not one single line of JavaScript to do that interaction or to build this functionality. And I believe that is really great, that you can just focus on PHP, you can focus on rendering the page, and you don't really have to deal with anything else at all. Because sometimes JavaScript can be a bit a pain for us PHP developers, and we like to skip it as much as possible, if that's actually possible. But if I try just to add some items here, no hard refreshes, you can see that this item is added instantly. For example, I can add something else here, foo, bar, as, and you can see that all of these items are added instantly. I can also check these items, and if I were to refresh the page, you can see that they would still just appear in the page as they with the correct state that they have. I can also just get rid of them. I also did add this small notification at the site, but it's not really important. But you can see that all of this is happening in the background, so we don't really have to do a lot. We don't have to do any refresh at all. There are other technologies that this Livewire would actually just complement each other. We could use something like turbo links, which basically allows us just to click on different types of pages, and that would allow us to just not do a hard refresh for the application, but we would basically just asynchronously fetch the data. Then we would do a DOM diffing, which basically just means just swapping out, just adding something to the headers section of the HTML, to the head section of the HTML, and we would basically just swap out the body. And that would all happen asynchronously, which would basically mean that we wouldn't have a full page refresh. And that is really good for someone who has a bad internet connection, and also for someone who doesn't really have a bulky or a very fast computer that they could test this on. So it's really important to focus on that part of the application as well. So I believe that this demo that I did show has been somewhat informative on these aspects, and that it allowed us to, you could actually see how easy it was to actually set up this system. I know that this is a very simple application, but hopefully it has given you some sort of idea on how easy it is to build something that is highly interactive. It's really performant, and it allows us to really just show us how PHP shines in 2020. So I believe that is all of my time. So I would just like to thank you all for listening to what I had to say. And yeah, I think I did good for my first presentation. Thank you.